I never thought a simple Christmas tradition could turn into a nightmare. It was December 1994, and my family, my wife Linda, our teenage son Mike, and our little girl Jenny, decided to start the holidays by picking out a real Christmas tree for the first time. Living in a small town in Michigan, we were surrounded by vast forests, and there was a certain charm in bringing a piece of that wilderness into our home. We drove out to Pinecrest Forest, a sprawling expanse of evergreens dusted with fresh snow. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and the distant sound of wind rustling through the branches. As we wandered among the trees, a particular fir caught our eye. It was tall and full, with dark green needles that seemed to shimmer in the fading sunlight. "That one," Jenny said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. We agreed it was perfect. After securing the tree to the roof of our car, we headed home, singing carols and sipping hot cocoa from thermoses. Back at the house, we set the tree up in the living room, its peak just brushing the ceiling. We spent the evening decorating, hanging ornaments collected over the years, each with its own story. By the time we finished, the tree stood as a glorious centerpiece, radiating the warmth and joy of the season. But that warmth didn't last. The first sign was subtle. As I sat alone that night, the rest of the family asleep, I thought I saw an ornament sway slightly. I dismissed it as a draft, though no windows were open. The next morning, Linda mentioned feeling a cold spot near the tree, but we attributed it to the house's old insulation. Things escalated when decorations began to move on their own. We'd find ornaments on the floor, hooks twisted, tinsel rearranged. Mike accused Jenny of sneaking downstairs at night to play pranks, but her terrified eyes said otherwise. One evening, as we gathered for dinner, we heard a faint rustling from the living room. It sounded like someone whispering, but the words were indistinct. We paused, listening. The house fell silent. "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to keep the mood light. But deep down, unease had begun to creep in. That night, I woke to the sound of creaking floorboards. I sat up, straining to hear. The noise seemed to emanate from the living room. Quietly, I slipped out of bed and tiptoed down the hallway. Peering around the corner, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. The tree was breathing. Its branches expanded and contracted ever so slightly, as if drawing in deep breaths. The ornaments glinted in the dim light, swaying gently despite the stillness of the air. I blinked hard, questioning my own eyes. Gathering my courage, I stepped into the room. The movement stopped abruptly. I approached the tree, placing a trembling hand on a branch. It was cold, colder than it should have been. A sudden jolt, like a static shock, made me pull back. "What's going on?" I whispered to myself. The next day, I told Linda about what I'd seen. She admitted she'd been feeling uneasy too, sensing a presence she couldn't explain. We decided not to tell the kids, not wanting to scare them, but it was too late for that. "There's something wrong with the tree," Mike said that afternoon. He held up his arm, revealing scratches that looked like they'd been made by needles or claws. "How did that happen?" I asked. "I don't know," he replied, eyes wide. "I was just reaching for my backpack, and something scratched me." Jenny was having nightmares, waking up screaming about the dark shadow that watched her from the corner of her room. Our festive home had become a place of fear. Desperate for answers, I set up our old camcorder in the living room, aiming it at the tree. If there was something happening, I wanted to capture it. That night, the house was restless. The sounds returned, whispers, creaks, the soft rustling of branches. The next morning, I played back the footage with Linda by my side. For a while, everything seemed normal. Then, around 2 a.m., the screen flickered. The tree's lights began to glow, brighter and brighter, until the camera struggled to adjust. Amidst the glare, a shadow emerged, a dark, monstrous silhouette that seemed to grow from the tree itself. It loomed larger, its form vaguely human but distorted, twisted. For a few agonizing seconds, it stood there, as if staring directly at us through the screen. Just as suddenly, the lights dimmed and the shadow vanished. We sat in stunned silence. "What is that?" Linda whispered. "I don't know," I replied, my mind racing, "but I think we need to find out where this tree came from." Leaving the kids with my sister, we drove back to Pinecrest Forest. We sought out the owner of the lot, an old man named Harold. When we showed him a photo of the tree, his face paled. "That section of the forest is supposed to be off limits," he said nervously. "Why?" Pressed. He hesitated before answering. "Years ago, there was an incident. A man went mad out there, murdered several people before taking his own life among those very trees. Locals say the forest absorbed the darkness of that act." "Why didn't you cut off access?" Linda demanded. Harold shook his head. "I thought the stories were just that, stories. I never believed." We left, a sense of dread settling over us. Back home, we researched the incident. Newspaper archives detailed the gruesome murders from 20 years prior. The killer had been a recluse, living in the woods, obsessed with dark rituals. The victims were hikers who'd crossed his path. Their bodies were never found, only traces of blood and personal effects. It was said that the forest was cursed, that the souls of the lost were trapped among the trees. "We have to get rid of it," Linda said firmly. That evening, we prepared to remove the tree. As we approached, a powerful gust of cold air blew through the house. Though every door and window was shut, the lights on the tree flickered erratically, casting shadows that seemed to writhe and contort on the walls. Together, we grabbed the tree and dragged it toward the front door, felt heavier than before, resisting our efforts as if rooted to the floor. With each inch we moved, the house groaned, the very structure protesting. "Keep going," I shouted over the escalating noise. Finally, we heaved it outside into the yard. The moment it hit the ground, the wind ceased, and an eerie silence enveloped us. "What now?" Linda asked, her breath visible in the cold night air. "We burn it," I replied. We doused the tree with lighter fluid and set it ablaze. The flames roared to life, reaching unnaturally high. Within the inferno, we glimpsed faces, contorted in anguish, mouths open in silent screams. The shadowy figure appeared one last time, rising with the smoke before dissipating into the night sky. As the fire died down, a profound sense of relief washed over us. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the warmth returned to our home. In the days that followed, we tried to move on. We didn't tell Mike and Jenny the full story, only that the tree had been infested with some kind of fungus that made it unsafe. They seemed to accept this, though I occasionally caught them casting wary glances at the spot where the tree once stood. Weeks later, I received a letter without a return address. Inside was an old photograph of the forest, dated 1974. In the background, barely visible among the trees, stood the same shadowy figure we'd seen in our home. On the back of the photo were the words, "Some secrets are rooted too deep to burn." I don't know who sent it or what it truly meant, but I do know this: some places, some things, carry a darkness that can't be easily escaped. We haven't had a real Christmas tree since. Artificial ones may lack the authentic scent of pine, but they bring us peace of mind. Every Christmas Eve, as snow blankets the ground and the world falls quiet, I find myself peering out the window toward the distant line of evergreens. And sometimes, just for a moment, I think I see a shadow moving between the trunks, a reminder that some secrets, some spirits, linger just beyond the edge of the light. Story number 2. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the supernatural. Growing up in the quaint village of Pine Hollow, Michigan, I believed that most ghost stories were nothing more than exaggerated tales passed down through generations. But that belief was shattered in the winter of 1980, the Christmas that turned our lives into a nightmare we couldn't escape. My name is David Carter, and I was a 34-year-old carpenter, happily married to Susan, and father to our 12-year-old son, Tommy, and 8-year-old daughter, Lily. We lived in a cozy, two-story house on the outskirts of Pine Hollow, surrounded by dense forests and rolling hills. Christmas was always a special time for us, filled with decorating, baking cookies, and the excitement of unwrapping presents. This year, however, we decided to do something different. We wanted a real Christmas tree, one that would be the centerpiece of our holiday celebrations. Early December, we ventured into the heart of Pinewood Forest, a place known for its majestic firs and pines. The air was crisp, and snowflakes danced lazily from the sky, covering the ground in a thick, white blanket. After hours of searching, we found it a towering, lush tree that seemed to glow under the soft winter sun. It was perfect. We carefully cut it down, loaded it into our truck, and headed home, our hearts filled with joy and anticipation. Setting up the tree was an event in itself. We rolled it into the living room, struggling to fit its grand stature into our space. The scent of fresh pine filled the air, and we began decorating with strings of colorful lights, delicate glass ornaments, and a shining star that perched proudly atop the highest branch. The tree looked magnificent, a symbol of our love and the festive spirit that enveloped our home. The first few days were blissful. Every morning, the tree stood tall and vibrant, its needles soft and green despite the passing days. We couldn't understand why it seemed so resilient, how it maintained its freshness even as the rest of the forest began to show signs of spring. But it was the small things that first caught our attention, ornaments shifting position on their own, lights flickering without explanation, and an inexplicable chill that settled in the room whenever we were near the tree. One evening, as we sat together sipping hot cocoa by the fireplace, the strange phenomena intensified. Susan noticed that the lights on the tree began to emit a faint, otherworldly glow, casting eerie shadows that danced around the room. Tommy and Lily clung to us, their innocent faces now etched with fear. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a peculiar quirk of our unusually resilient tree. But deep down, something felt terribly wrong. That night, I was awakened by a loud crash, heart pounding. I jumped out of bed and rushed to the living room, only to find the tree seemingly alive. Its branches twisted and swayed violently. Despite the absence of any wind, the ornaments clattered to the floor, and the lights flickered erratically, casting the room into disorienting flashes of light and darkness. I could feel an oppressive presence in the room, a malevolent force that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Susan and the kids were huddled together, trembling with fear. "We need to get rid of it," Susan whispered, her voice shaky but determined. But no matter how hard we tried, the tree resisted our efforts. Each time we attempted to move it, an invisible force pushed it back, as if something or someone was determined to keep it in place. The nights grew worse, with the tree exhibiting increasingly sinister behavior. We heard whispers emanating from its branches, voices that spoke in a language we couldn't understand, and shadowy figures that seemed to lurk just beyond the edge of our vision. Desperate for answers, we reached out to the local authorities, but they found nothing out of the ordinary. There were no signs of tampering, no evidence of foul play, just a beautifully decorated tree that refused to die. Frustrated and terrified, we turned to the only resource we had left, old legends and folklore. In our research, we stumbled upon a tale that sent chills down our spines. It spoke of a dark ritual performed by a twisted priest in the early 1900s, deep within Pinewood Forest. The priest had sought to harness the power of the forest spirits, but the ritual had gone horribly wrong, cursing the very trees meant to honor them. It was said that those who dared to cut down and bring home these cursed trees would invite darkness into their homes, forever trapped by the malevolent spirits within. Realizing that our tree was likely one of those cursed, we knew we had to act quickly to save our family. We contacted Father Michael, a respected priest known for his knowledge of ancient rituals and his ability to deal with supernatural phenomena. When he arrived, his presence brought a sense of hope, though his eyes betrayed the gravity of our situation. After examining the tree and listening to our account, Father Michael confirmed our fears. "This tree is indeed cursed," he said solemnly. "It harbors the spirit of those who were wronged by the ritual. To break the curse, we must perform a cleansing ceremony and return the tree to its rightful place in the forest." With Father Michael's guidance, we prepared for the ritual. The ceremony required us to return the tree to Pinewood Forest and perform specific rites to appease the spirits trapped within it. The night before Christmas, under a crescent moon, we set out with the tree, carrying the weight of our hope and fear. The journey back to Pinewood Forest was fraught with tension. The forest seemed darker, more foreboding than before, as if sensing our presence. As we approached the spot where the ritual had originally been performed, Father Michael began the chanting, his voice steady and commanding. We followed his instructions meticulously, setting up the sacred circle and invoking the spirits with offerings of pine cones and candles. As the ceremony progressed, the air grew thick with energy. The tree, now placed in the center of the grove, began to shimmer with an ethereal light. The whispers from before returned, but this time, they were softer, more pleading. The shadows that had once been menacing now seemed sorrowful, yearning for release. Suddenly, a powerful gust of wind swept through the grove, and the tree's branches began to move as if guided by an unseen hand. The oppressive presence that had plagued our home was lifted, replaced by a sense of peace and closure. The shadows dissolved, and the spirits, now free, faded into the night sky, their anguish finally put to rest. Exhausted but relieved, we loaded the tree onto our truck and began the journey home. As we drove away, the first light of dawn broke through the trees, signaling the end of our ordeal. Back in Cedar Falls, the tree was no longer a source of fear but a symbol of our resilience and the power of faith. That Christmas was the most memorable one we ever had, not because of the decorations or the gifts, but because we had faced our deepest fears and triumphed over darkness. The tree that wouldn't die was gone, replaced by a new tradition of honoring the spirits and respecting the legends that shaped our lives. Years have passed since that harrowing Christmas, and the memory of the cursed tree remains etched in our hearts. We moved away from Cedar Falls, seeking a fresh start, but the lessons we learned stayed with us. The story of the tree that wouldn't die became a family legend, a cautionary tale we shared with our children to remind them of the thin veil between the ordinary and the supernatural. Sometimes, when the wind howls just right, I still feel a chill and catch a glimpse of shadows dancing in the corner of my eye, but I no longer fear them. I know that with courage, faith, and the support of loved ones, we can overcome even the darkest of curses. And every Christmas, as we decorate our artificial tree, we hold onto the hope that the true spirit of the season, love, unity, and light will always prevail over the shadows. So, as you gather around your own Christmas tree this holiday season, remember our story, cherish your loved ones, honor the past, and keep the light alive. For in the heart of every Christmas lies both joy and mystery, and it is our duty to protect the magic that makes this season truly special. Story number 3. The first time we saw the tree, it was love at first sight. The Evergreen Emporium had always been our go-to place for holiday decorations, but that year, something about the towering fir in the corner of the store called to us. It was larger than any tree we'd ever seen, its branches thick and lush, promising a grand centerpiece for our Christmas celebrations. Without hesitation, my wife, Laura, and I decided it was perfect for our family of 4. We hauled it home on a chilly November afternoon, the scent of fresh pine filling our modest living room. The kids, Emma and Ben, buzzed with excitement as we began the tedious process of decorating. Strings of colorful lights, delicate ornaments, and a shimmering star atop the highest branch transformed the tree into a beacon of holiday cheer. As night fell, the tree stood majestic, casting dancing shadows across the room from its twinkling lights. But that was the night everything changed. It started innocently enough, a soft creaking sound emanating from the tree, barely audible over the hum of our holiday festivities. First, We dismissed it as the settling of a large tree or the wind whispering through its branches. But as the days progressed, the noises grew more persistent, rustling, tapping, and the unmistakable sound of something moving within the tree. Laura and I exchanged worried glances, but the kids were too enthralled by the holiday spirit to notice. That is, until one evening when Emma came running into our bedroom, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Mom, Dad, the tree, it's moving," she gasped, clutching her favorite ornament tightly. We rushed to the living room, expecting to see Emma's imagination running wild. Instead, the tree stood still, the ornaments glinting innocently in the dim light. Yet, the air felt heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. I reached out to steady Emma, but before I could, the lights on the tree began to flicker violently, casting erratic shadows that danced menacingly around us. "What's going on?" Laura demanded, her voice trembling, before we could respond. A deep, guttural growl echoed from within the tree. The kids screamed, huddling behind us as the room seemed to darken unnaturally. A shadowy figure emerged from the branches, its form shifting and contorting like smoke caught in a storm. It had no discernible shape, but its presence was undeniably malevolent. "We need to get rid of it," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Laura nodded, her face pale but resolute. We spent the rest of the night trying to ignore the disturbances, but sleep eluded us as the tree seemed to watch, the silent eyes following our every move. The following day, determination replaced fear. We decided to investigate the tree's origins, hoping to uncover any clues that might explain the horrors it had brought into our home. Our search led us to the Evergreen Emporium's back storage room, where we found old records and invoices. One document caught my eye, a receipt dated back to the early 1900s, listing the tree's purchase from a remote logging camp in the Cascade Mountains. Curiosity burning brighter than fear, I delved deeper, uncovering local legends and stories about the logging camp. According to old folktales, the camp was built atop sacred land, home to ancient spirits that guarded the forest. When the logging began, the spirits were angered, leading to numerous accidents and mysterious disappearances. The camp was abandoned abruptly, with workers fleeing in terror, leaving behind nothing but the cursed trees they had cut. Realizing the truth was far more sinister than we had imagined, we knew we had to act. The tree was not just a decoration. It was a vessel for something dark and vengeful. That night, as the family sat together trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy, the tree's disturbances escalated. The shadows grew darker, the growls louder, and the feeling of being watched intensified. "We can't stay here," Laura said, her voice firm despite her fear. "We need to destroy it." But destroying a tree that seemed to be alive was easier said than done. We contemplated cutting it down, but the tree's malevolent presence seemed to resist any attempt to harm it. Every time we tried, the room would plunge into darkness, and the shadows would lash out, forcing us to retreat. Desperate, I reached out to a local historian, Mrs. Whitaker, who was well-versed in the town's lore. She listened intently as I recounted our ordeal, her expression grave. "The tree you have is cursed," she confirmed. "Those spirits from the Cascade Mountains were never appeased. To break the curse, you must return the tree to its rightful place and perform a ritual to honor the spirits." With no other options, we agreed to follow her guidance. The next morning, we prepared for the journey to the Cascade Mountains, the weight of our task pressing heavily on us. Emma and Ben were terrified, but Laura and I reassured them that we were doing this to protect our family. The drive was long and arduous, the landscape growing wilder and more foreboding as we approached the mountains. By evening, we reached the old logging camp, now overgrown and eerily silent. The air was thick with the scent of pine and something unidentifiable, something rotten. We carried the tree carefully, its branches seeming to resist our every step. Mrs. Whitaker met us at the edge of the sacred grove, her presence a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. The ritual must be performed under the full moon, she instructed. It is the only time the spirits are receptive to our plea. As night fell, the full moon cast a silvery glow over the grove. We arranged the tree in the center, its malevolent presence still palpable despite our efforts. Mrs. Whitaker began the incantation, her voice steady and strong, calling out to the spirits with respect and humility. "We honor you, guardians of this land," she intoned. "We seek forgiveness for the harm caused and ask for peace to return." The air grew thick, and the temperature dropped as the spirits began to respond. The shadows around the tree coalesced into forms, their anger palpable. But as Mrs. Whitaker continued the ritual, their forms softened, the tension in the air easing. A gust of wind swept through the grove, carrying away the darkness. The tree, once a vessel of malevolence, now stood serene under the moonlight, its branches swaying gently as if in gratitude. "We did it," Laura whispered, relief washing over her. The shadows dissipated, leaving behind a peaceful silence. The tree no longer felt alive with dark energy but stood as a testament to our resilience and the power of honoring the past. We loaded the tree onto our truck, its curse lifted, and began the journey home. As we drove back to Evergreen Heights, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon, the oppressive feeling that had haunted us for weeks lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and gratitude. Back home, the tree stood silent and still, no longer a source of fear but a symbol of our triumph over darkness. We carefully unpacked it, setting it in the living room once more. As we decorated it, the ornaments glimmered without the sinister shadows, and the lights twinkled with genuine warmth. That Christmas was the most memorable one we ever had, not because of the decorations or the gifts, but because we had faced our fears and restored peace to our home. The haunted Christmas tree was gone, replaced by a new tradition of honoring the spirits and respecting the legends that shape our lives. Years later, the story of the haunted Christmas tree remains a cherished family tale, a reminder that even in the brightest of seasons, shadows can linger, but with courage and unity, we can overcome the darkness and embrace the true spirit of Christmas. So, as you gather around your own tree each holiday season, remember our story, cherish your loved ones, honor the past, and keep the light alive. For in the heart of every Christmas lies both joy and mystery, and it is our duty to protect the magic that makes this season truly special. Story number 4. I never believed in curses or dark rituals. Growing up in the quiet village of Maplewood, Oregon, my life was simple, filled with school, sports, and the annual excitement of Christmas. But that changed in the winter of 1975. The Christmas that left scars on my family and me. Scars that time hasn't fully healed. It was early December when my parents decided to buy a Christmas tree from the nearby Pinewood Forest. Pinewood was known for its towering pines and pristine beauty, a favorite spot for families seeking the perfect tree. On a crisp Saturday morning, we loaded up our old station wagon and drove to the edge of the forest, where the scent of pine filled the air and the ground was blanketed in fresh snow. The Evergreen Emporium, a small shop nestled among the trees, was our destination. My father, always meticulous, chose a grand fir with thick, lush branches and a strong trunk. It was larger than any tree we had ever bought, promising to be the centerpiece of our holiday decorations. We hauled the tree home, the branches brushing against the sides of the wagon, leaving scratches on the paint. Setting it up in our living room was no small feat, but the excitement in my parents' eyes made it all worthwhile. We adorned the tree with strings of colorful lights, delicate glass ornaments, and a shining star that sat proudly atop the highest branch. That first night, as we sat around the tree sipping hot cocoa, I noticed something odd. The lights never seemed to fully illuminate the branches. Instead, shadows clung to the edges, creating an unsettling darkness even amidst the twinkling lights. I brushed it off as my imagination, a trick of the light, but my unease lingered. As days turned into weeks, strange things began to happen. The tree seemed to grow heavier, its branches pressing down more tightly against the ceiling. The lights, which initially sparkled brilliantly, began to flicker sporadically, never reaching their full brightness. My parents, though puzzled, attributed it to faulty wiring or a particularly tangled strand of lights. But it wasn't just the tree. Every night, without fail, I was plagued by nightmares. Horrifying visions of shadowy figures moving within the tree's branches haunted my sleep. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, convinced that something was watching me from the darkness of the tree. One evening, as we gathered in the living room for dinner, the atmosphere grew tense. The usual warmth and laughter were replaced by an oppressive silence. Suddenly, the lights on the tree began to flicker violently, casting erratic shadows that danced menacingly around the room. My mother gasped as a dark, indistinct shape seemed to materialize among the branches, its presence palpable and terrifying. "Dad, the tree, Emma," my younger sister, whispered, her voice trembling. "It's moving." My father rushed over, but the tree stood still, its ornaments glinting innocently in the dim light. Yet, the air felt thick with something malevolent. I reached out to steady Emma, but before I could, a deep, guttural growl echoed from within the tree. The room plunged into darkness as the lights went out, and a chilling wind swept through the house despite the cold outside. We sat frozen, the only sound our ragged breathing and the distant howl of the wind. Suddenly, the tree's branches seemed to twist and contort, reaching out like skeletal fingers. Shadows coalesced into shapes, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light as they stared directly at us. The presence in the room was undeniable, a force of pure evil emanating from the very heart of our Christmas tree. The next day, desperation drove us to investigate the tree's origins. We returned to the Evergreen Emporium, where the owner, Mr. Jenkins, seemed oddly evasive when we inquired about the tree. His eyes darted nervously, and his voice wavered as he spoke of ancient traditions and the sacredness of Pinewood Forest. Undeterred, we delved deeper, scouring old records and local legends. It was then that I stumbled upon a disturbing account, an old ritual conducted by a sinister priest in the early 1900s. The ritual was meant to harness the power of the forest spirits, but it had gone horribly wrong, cursing the very trees meant to honor them. The tree we had brought home was no ordinary fir. It was part of that dark ritual, imbued with malevolent energy and trapping the souls of those who had perished in the failed ceremony. Realizing the gravity of our situation, we knew we had to act. The nightmares, the shadows, the oppressive presence, they were all signs that the curse was growing stronger, feeding off our fear and unrest. My parents were resolute, but the children were terrified, their innocence shattered by the darkness that had invaded our home. One night, determined to break the curse, we decided to remove the tree. As we attempted to lift it from the living room, an invisible force slammed it back into place. Shattering our efforts, the room filled with an ear-piercing screech, and the shadows surged forward, their forms twisting into grotesque shapes that clawed at our sanity. Frustration and fear mounting, we sought help from Mrs. Whitaker, a local shaman known for her knowledge of ancient rituals and protective charms. She listened intently as we recounted our ordeal, her expression grave and knowing. "The tree you have is cursed," she confirmed. "It holds the spirits of those who were wronged by the ritual. To break the curse, we must return the tree to the sacred grove and perform a cleansing ceremony under the light of the full moon." With no other options, we agreed to follow her guidance. The next morning, we prepared for the journey, the weight of our task pressing heavily on us. The children were scared, but we reassured them that we were doing this to protect our family and free the trapped souls. The drive to the sacred grove was long and arduous, the road winding through dense forests and shadowed valleys. By evening, we reached our destination, a secluded area deep within Pinewood Forest, untouched by time and teeming with an eerie stillness. The air was thick with the scent of pine and something else, something rotten and dark. Under the full moon, Mrs. Whitaker began the cleansing ritual. She chanted ancient words, her voice steady and strong, calling out to the spirits with respect and humility. We arranged the tree in the center, its presence still malevolent but overshadowed by the shaman's power. As the ceremony progressed, the air grew colder, and the shadows around us began to writhe and twist. The spirits trapped within the tree manifested, their forms translucent and sorrowful. The tree resisted, its branches twisting violently, trying to break free from the sacred ground. But Mrs. Whitaker's chants grew louder, more powerful, and gradually, the darkness began to lift. A fierce wind swept through the grove, and the tree stood still, its curse finally broken. The spirits, now free, faded into the night, their anguish replaced by a sense of peace. The oppressive presence that had haunted our home was lifted, leaving behind a profound sense of relief and gratitude. We loaded the tree onto our truck. Its malevolent energy dissipated, and began the journey home. As we drove back to Maplewood, the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon, the weight of the past weeks lifted, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and unity. Back home, the tree stood silent and still, no longer a source of fear but a symbol of our triumph over darkness. We carefully unpacked it, setting it in the living room once more. As we decorated it, the ornaments glimmered without the sinister shadows, and the lights twinkled with genuine warmth. That Christmas was the most memorable one we ever had, not because of the decorations or the gifts, but because we had faced our fears and restored peace to our home. The evil tree was gone, replaced by a new tradition of honoring the spirits and respecting the legends that shape our lives. Years later, the story of the evil tree remains a cherished family tale, a reminder that even in the brightest of seasons, shadows can linger, but with courage and unity, we can overcome the darkness and embrace the true spirit of Christmas. So, as you gather around your own tree each holiday season, remember our story, cherish your loved ones, honor the past, and keep the light alive. For in the heart of every Christmas lies both joy and mystery, and it is our duty to protect the magic that makes this season truly special. Story number 5. I always loved the holidays. There was something magical about the way the town of Cedar Falls transformed each December. The streets twinkling with lights, the scent of pine and cinnamon permeating every home, and the laughter of children anticipating Santa's arrival. But that year, 1987, our Christmas was anything but ordinary. My name is Mark Thompson, and I remember that winter like it was yesterday. My wife, Sarah, and our 2 children, Lily and Tommy, had been eagerly waiting for Christmas. After months of saving, we decided to buy a real Christmas tree from Evergreen Pines, the largest tree farm in the area. It was our first Christmas with a full-grown tree, and excitement buzzed through our home as we anticipated the festive decorations. We drove out to Evergreen Pines on a crisp Saturday morning. The farm was a picturesque expanse of towering firs, their branches heavy with snow. After what felt like hours of searching, we found it, a magnificent tree, taller and fuller than any we had ever seen. It was perfect. With some effort, we loaded it onto our truck and began the journey home. The tree's scent filling the cabin with a promise of holiday cheer. Setting up the tree was a family affair. We carefully placed it in our living room, securing it to the stand and making sure it stood straight. Decorating was even more delightful. Lily and Tommy eagerly hung their favorite ornaments, their faces glowing with happiness as the tree took shape. We strung the lights, adding a warm, golden glow that made the room feel cozy and inviting. But as the days went by, strange things began to happen. First, it was small things, ornaments falling off the branches despite our careful placement, lights flickering inexplicably. We chalked it up to the tree settling or maybe faulty decorations. But soon, the disturbances became more unsettling. One evening, as I was untangling a particularly stubborn strand of lights, I heard a soft creaking sound coming from the tree. I glanced over, half expecting to see a branch swaying from the wind. but the room was calm, shaking off the unease. I returned to my task. That night, as Sarah tucked the kids into bed, I felt a chill sweep through the room. Though the heater was off, the air felt heavy, as if something was watching us. Over the next few days, the phenomena escalated. The tree seemed to grow more unstable, its branches twisting unnaturally. The lights would flicker violently, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. One night, I woke to the sound of muffled whispers emanating from the tree. Rubbing my eyes, I sat up, trying to make sense of the noise. The room was still, but the whispers persisted, growing louder and more urgent. Sarah and I decided to investigate. We carefully examined the tree, inspecting each branch and ornament. That's when we noticed it, a faint, almost imperceptible figure lurking among the branches. It was a shadowy silhouette, barely visible but undeniably present. My heart raced as I pointed it out to Sarah. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "Something's not right, Mark. We need to get rid of this tree." But how? It was our beautiful centerpiece, the symbol of our first real Christmas together. Reluctantly, we decided to keep a closer watch, hoping the disturbances would subside. They didn't. Instead, the tree's presence became more oppressive. The room felt colder, the shadows deeper, and the feeling of being watched intensified. One night, on Christmas Eve, everything changed. We were all gathered in the living room, enjoying a quiet evening by the fire. The tree stood tall, its lights dim but still twinkling. Suddenly, the lights began to flicker uncontrollably, plunging the room into intermittent darkness. The temperature dropped sharply, and a dense fog seemed to emanate from the tree's base, enveloping the room in a ghostly mist. Tommy clutched his blanket, whimpering. Lily held onto Sarah tightly, her eyes wide with terror. I stood up, trying to maintain control, but the atmosphere was thick with dread. That's when the shadowy figure emerged fully from the tree, its form twisted and grotesque. It hovered above the branches, eyes burning with an unnatural light, staring directly at us. "Leave now," it hissed, its voice echoing through the room like the whisper of a dying wind. Panic surged through me. "We need to get out of here," I shouted, grabbing Sarah and pulling the kids toward the door. But the figure moved with supernatural speed, blocking our path. The room seemed to warp around us, the walls closing in, the shadows stretching and clawing at our sanity. Desperate, I remembered the old tales my grandfather had told me about cursed objects and how to dispel malevolent spirits. He had always warned me about taking things from the forest, about respecting the ancient spirits that dwelled there. Maybe the tree was one of those cursed objects, a remnant of dark rituals long forgotten. "We need to burn it," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gripping me. "It's the only way to break the curse." Sarah nodded, her face pale but determined. We rushed to gather blankets and coats, bundling the tree up tightly. As we dragged it toward the fireplace, the shadowy figure intensified its presence, the room vibrating with dark energy. The whispers turned into screams, the air thick with malevolence. With trembling hands, I threw the tree into the fireplace, the flames roaring to life as the tree began to burn. The heat was intense, the scent of burning pine filling the room. The figure let out a bone-chilling scream, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of hell itself. The shadows recoiled, and the oppressive atmosphere began to lift as the fire consumed the cursed tree. But the battle wasn't over. The figure fought back, its form writhing and twisting as it tried to escape the flames. I felt a surge of energy push against me, threatening to knock me over. Sarah and I clung to each other, watching as the fire devoured the tree, the light flickering wildly around us. Finally, with one last, desperate scream, the figure was consumed by the flames, its presence dissolving into smoke and ash. The room fell silent, the oppressive weight lifting, replaced by a sense of relief and exhaustion. We stood there, panting and shaking, surrounded by the remnants of the cursed tree. The next morning, the house felt lighter, the air warmer, the nightmares ceased, and the feeling of being watched vanished. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the experience left its mark on our family. The children were quieter, more reflective, and Sarah and I shared a deeper bond forged in the fires of fear and survival. In the weeks that followed, we shared our story with friends and neighbors, warning them about the dangers of taking the perfect tree without knowing its origins. The Evergreen Emporium faced scrutiny, their once trusted reputation tarnished by our ordeal. They claimed ignorance, but many believed there was more to our story than just a cursed tree. Years later, the memory of that Christmas remains vivid. It serves as a reminder of the thin veil between the ordinary and the supernatural, of how something as simple as a Christmas tree can become a vessel for darkness. We moved away from Cedar Falls, seeking a fresh start, but the scars of that winter never fully healed. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint whispers of that cursed tree, a lingering echo of the horror we endured. The story of the Christmas tree possession became a local legend, a cautionary tale passed down through generations, warning families to respect the ancient spirits and the dark secrets that lie hidden in the forests. So, as you decorate your tree each holiday season, remember our story, cherish your loved ones, honor the past, and be mindful of the forces that you might inadvertently awaken. For in the heart of every Christmas lies both light and shadow, and it is our duty to protect the magic that makes this season truly special.